Hello, listeners. My name is Dr. Ryan Todd. I am the host of Beyond the Checkbox, a show where we talk about the future of mental wellness in the workplace. We are extremely excited to be joined by Stephanie McDonald, who is the Senior Vice President of People and Culture at Parkland Fuel, one of the world's fastest growing companies. A lot of exponential growth, a lot of change, and Stephanie is leading the charge in this company, and we're very excited to have her on to discuss this change, to discuss wellness, to discuss mental wellness, and her own journey through all of this.
The day that I wrote my last final exam
Yeah.
for my commerce degree,
Yeah.
I left Saskatoon because I knew I wanted to be in HR.
Yeah.
And at that point, there was no HR departments, let alone HR people
Really?
around, unless you worked for a Potash Corporation, the government, really,
Yeah.
or Cameco. It just wasn't as a robust economy as it is today.
So you knew you wanted to do HR?
I did.
Like
Yeah.
from what age?
It was in university. Like
Okay.
I went into arts and sciences to start,
Yeah.
right? Because I wasn't sure, but it was clear to me that biology and some of these other classes weren't really my jam.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I took an early course on leadership.
Yeah.
As an elective. I have no idea how I actually got into that class, but anyway, the professor was quite inspiring, and it all started kind of fundamentally there.
Very cool. So you saw the leadership aspect, and you're like, this is something that resonates.
Yeah.
And where did you go from? Like, where was your first HR gig? Because you worked in Europe for a while. You were in Switzerland.
Yep.
You were down south for a number of years. What was your first entry into HR?
Well, my first kind of official job was at a company here in town in Calgary called Care West. So Care West at that time was a wholly owned subsidiary of the Calgary Health Region.
Yes. And I think it's still something like that,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah. Now it's Alberta Health Services, of course, but
Yeah.
they're still a company that has a number of continuing care units across the city that support seniors, primarily in different stages of care.
Okay.
And so that was my first real HR gig, and it was great. It was a great experience because you have such a diversity of employee population. You've got such a very strong purpose-driven organization. It's very physical and mentally challenging work.
Yes.
And, you get to see everything at play every day at a company like that. And so you learn a lot in a couple of years somewhere.
Tell us about that. That I'm not sure when that was, but I doubt at that time when you started, purpose-driven organization
Yeah.
was like a thing, because it's in the ether now, right? Everyone
Yeah.
talks about you got to have purpose, and I think there's this assumption that we limped along for years without mission statements, and now we have them, and our organizations are awesome. So what was it there at Care West, and what is it now? Because I sense that Parkland Fuel is a very purpose-driven organization, very purposeful in what they do, and you're leading the charge in that. So take me back to what it was then, and what does that mean now?
Yeah. Well, I think companies for a long time have had a purpose, but maybe didn't use that nomenclature, right? It's now cool to say purpose, but I think back then there was just such a mission involved in supporting seniors as they continue to age, and it's from the heart and the soul, and everybody has parents, right? And so I think that it connects to you personally in that way. I think when I fast forward my life to Parkland's a really, really unique place. I mean, obviously, we are a very large company now that has grown significantly over the last number of years.
Could you give us a sense of the growth? Because I try and put it into numbers.
Yeah.
Like $3.3 billion in 3 years, or
Yeah.
17 acquisitions in the last 4 years.
Yeah.
But give us a sense of that growth.
Yeah, so Parkland, when you think about the company in 2016, it was primarily a Western Canadian company. I would say around 300 employees, maybe. We had around 250 million in EBITDA in 2016. And then you fast forward to 2019, and we have around 5,000 employees. We're in 25 countries. We've got 4 languages, lots of currencies, lots of complexity, and our guidance was 1.24 billion in EBITDA. So quite a dramatic growth over such a short period of time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you, yeah, so like give me a perspective. What does that look like from your vantage? Because that must be a wild ride, like one of the fastest growing companies in the world. You are the senior vice president of people and culture, and you've grown from 250 to 4,000.
Yeah.
Did you say 4,000?
5,000,
5,000?
Yeah.
What does that look like from your vantage? And then how do you do that?
I've only been with Parkland for just over a year. And so I'm still learning a ton about the company and the external market, this industry, our customers, our competitors, and ultimately the culture at Parkland, because we think that really the culture is one of the competitive differentiators of a company like us.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we operate in a space where lots of the big integrated oil companies have played or continue to play. But then we also focus a lot on our retail arms as well, where we actually, sell things direct to consumers. And so we're a really kind of unique company in the way that we are set out in our business model. But then we're also really unique, we think, in terms of our culture, because at the end, we consider ourselves more of a speedboat compared to a big integrated oil company, which is much more like a big oil tanker. So you see, the analogy is that maybe we're not quite a jet ski, because we definitely have more structure and more process than that, but we do have the ability to maneuver and be nimble and adaptable much more quickly and in direct kind of reaction to the market than some of our competitors.
Speedboat versus tanker. How do you
Yeah.
do that how do you be a speedboat when you're 5,000 people?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something that we struggle with, that we are challenged with all the time. Because one of the things that's made Parkland super successful is that it's a very entrepreneurial kind of company. And as you continue to grow, it's hard to hold on to that essence because at some point you do need some structure, you do need some process and systems to help you to continue to scale the organization, go forward. And we have huge growth ambitions still ahead of us. And so we have to really balance between that entrepreneurial spirit, that kind of take charge attitude, and also some of the structure and infrastructure we need to help us grow.
If it's okay, I just want to dive into that balance
because
it's incredibly complex and interesting. So, like, to me, entrepreneurialism or the entrepreneurial spirit, and I think you define it very well, right? Like, you have someone in the organization who needs to take charge. They have an idea. They're going to carry that forward. That seems challenging when you have 5,000 people, presumably 5,000 ideas. So who gets to speak? Who gets to take their idea forward? And how do you balance that with, I imagine, a needed process to process all the ideas and the motivations and then still keep the speedboat going in the same direction?
Yeah. No, it's a bit, sometimes it seems like you're operating in a bit of a paradox. But I think in the end, as with many things in organizations, it's about leadership and about engagement. And what we do at Parkland is that we do try to keep a very open culture. and where leaders are listening and hearing what's going on, because it's really the frontline employees that have the direct interaction with our customers in the end. And so, I think having that ability to hear from really the front line all the way to the CEO in some organizations is quite tough, because there's a lot of hierarchy, there's a lot of formality, and that's not really Parkland style. Our CEO sits in a cubicle just like everybody else in our very open office type of environment, and you can go up to him or anybody else and have a conversation about what's working well, what isn't working well, and any idea you have, and it's not really frowned upon. And so I think that it is challenging, because as you continue to grow from what was a very, very small company based in Red Deer, Alberta, to the company that we are today, you really have to have some formal mechanisms to help people, contribute, and also some informal mechanisms. And that's about leaders really making sure that they're encouraging that kind of culture and environment.
So your employee number 4,999, and
Right.
you can go up to yourself or the CEO
Yep.
and pitch an idea. Like, do you have to send a meeting request, a meeting invite? I can't even talk to Jordan, our producer, without sending it, and he works 3 feet away from me. So how do you do that? And
Yeah.
how is he and how are you not overwhelmed by? There has to be some sort of, I don't know, screening process or something.
Yeah, there isn't, though.
Okay, screening, that's a bad term. That makes it sound very clinical. Yeah, tell me about that. That seems that's innovative. That's bold, and it's clear right away that is a huge contributant to why you are growing and how you can maintain that entrepreneurial spirit. So tell me the essence of that.
Yeah. I think it's fundamentally that we're all kind of after the same goal. I think there's one of the real things about Parkland that's unique and interesting as well, and you see this in our engagement survey as an example. People are really clear about what their job is and how that job connects to the overall ambition of the company. So people have line of sight to what we're trying to do and how they can actually have an impact. And I think that helps, right? So I think that would start. And then, of course, it's just the real openness. Listen, the CEO is very busy, and you can imagine that there are lots of people that want to see him. But he literally sits just in a cubicle, and if he's there, you absolutely can go up to him and talk to him and pitch him an idea if you want, or just talk to him like a regular human, because he is that too. And he has this real presence about him that I think permeates in the company, and we all try to be like that.
That seems really simple now that you break it down. I think a lot of organizations, at least when I'm talking to leaders, they struggle with that. Like, I think if they could accomplish that, everyone knows what they're there for, and they have a line of sight to the greater vision. How do you accomplish that? Because it sounds really simple, but I'm assuming it's quite difficult and effortful at times, and it is in the end kind of an elegant solution to make sure everyone's rowing in the same direction. So how do you accomplish that? Take us through kind of the nuts and bolts of how you create a culture that, everyone knows where they're going and they know what to do to get there.
Yeah. Well, it's not perfect either. But we really try to communicate, obvious, but really share what the key priorities are, what they're tied to in terms of the overall strategy. And I think one of the key things to be successful there is a certain level of transparency. I've been in other organizations where information was a bit more tightly held than it certainly is at Parkland, and so we have open forums with our senior management team. So top 80 people in the company, let's say, we have regular conversations with them, and that's with the CEO, the entire leadership team, and of course all of them. But then we also engage our employees more formally at least every quarter after the results to talk a little bit about what went well and what didn't go so well and what we need to focus on in that upcoming quarter and that kind of thing. And then, every leader has regular kind of conversations with their teams about what we're doing and how they are contributing to that work. And so I think it's an ever-evolving challenge, but keeping those lines of communication open and continuing to, refer to the progress that we're making against those key priorities you may have set helps people really understand where they might fit in.
How do you communicate in that context when transparency is the thing that you need and communication is the thing that you need? How do you communicate messages that aren't so fun, like headwinds in the market or a stagnant quarter, for lack of a better term, bad news? I imagine it's easy to communicate, hey, we're growing, we've acquired 17 companies and we're moving forward. How do you communicate when things aren't going so well? Because that happens in every single company. Yeah.
I would say that part of Parkland's culture too is to be authentic. So we don't hide, behind some of the tough stuff either. Now, luckily for Parkland, as you said, 15, 16 quarters of consecutive growth. And so it's a pretty good news story. But, there are some things that you still have to make decisions on that aren't as easy, even in a growing company. And so I think that it's with some real kind of authenticity that you come to the table and talk to people about what kind of headwinds we are facing and why we have to make the decisions that we've made and what we're going to do next. So, I think it's really that simple.
Does the leadership team, they have their internal debate as to what is going to happen? And do you find it is important? Authenticity, I find such a fascinating concept. And that's also like a thing that's, I think a lot of companies are struggling with. The issue as I see it, and correct me if this is an adolescent way of looking at it, is you want to try and communicate everything you possibly can to an organization. That is authenticity, like the good and the bad, the dirty laundry and the clean laundry. The issue around that, I think, and the difficulty is when there's something that the team isn't necessarily decided upon. Because business, I think, is a lot, there's no clear answers. Coming from my background in medicine, there are a lot of unclear answers, but for the most part, we have rubrics and we have textbooks, and if that blood work shows this, you do that. In business, it's different. There's no textbook. For Parkland's exponential growth, there's no one who's really done that in this space before. So when organizations and leaders in particular are trying to figure out what the heck is going on themselves, how do they communicate that?
Yep.
I think that for me is the hang up of authenticity, is how do you communicate ambiguity? How do you communicate, we're still trying to figure our shit out right now. So how do we get that across?
But that's what we say, right? I mean,
That's
when
nice.
you're a leader, I think you run into a trap where you always think you have to have the answer to every question, and we don't. I mean, we're humans just like everybody else, right? We put our pants one leg on at a time, and so when we don't have the answer, we can say, and we should say, that we don't have the answer, but I think that we're constantly working to try to make quick decisions as much as possible. And I think one of the unique things about Parkland is that we're probably willing to take a little bit more risk than some other companies in this space. And that also, helps, because at times leaders have to take some decisions without all the information at their fingertips, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And so really within Parkland we have this notion that if we at least put something out there, try something, and if it doesn't work, then we'll learn from it, and then we'll adjust, and then we'll decide what to do next. But things don't have to be perfect to start, and you just continuously improve it over time.
So there seems to be a key in there where you've created a culture that you can charge ahead and make mistakes.
Yeah.
Which I think that's probably a crucial component. And I want to get your perspective on like how that's changed over the years, like when you first started in people and culture. From my vantage, I think that there's been an evolution there maybe where leaders were previously like all bravado, all like you need to be strong, you need to know the answers, you need to put on a front, where there's been a change toward more authentic leadership and communicating the type of culture that you've created, which is we can make mistakes and it's okay, we don't know all the answers. Has that been an evolution? And I guess the pursuant question is why did that happen? Like, where did that happen? When did that happen? Like, how did you see that develop, if that actually has developed?
Yeah. I think again, this is one of the things that makes Parkland unique, and I sound like a bit of a broken record here, but it is a really unique company in that way. And so I can't really compare, Care West or Lafarge Wholesome and Parkland, because they were different companies. They had different ambitions. They had different cultures that supported those ambitions. And so at Parkland, in the end, I think it all comes back to this notion of entrepreneurial spirit. Because when you think about entrepreneurs in the world, they don't ever succeed the first time, usually, right? And so with that spirit in mind and with that culture in mind, we really try to allow for some risk and some exposure. Now, we're not taking crazy risks, of course. We are a company that is tied to the market. But, we want employees to feel like they have a stake in this company and have an ownership mindset. And in order to do that, you have to allow some decision-making and accountability in the organization that isn't all tied to the top.
So it's like peer accountability. It's more of an egalitarian, more flat organization. People are responsible to each other.
Yeah, and it's not perfect, right?
Yeah.
But I think because of the transparency, because of the authenticity, because of the low hierarchy, all of those things kind of contribute to the overall culture.
When you first started, were these topics that were talked about, discussed, sought after? Transparency, authenticity, what's it called? Shallow. To have a shallow leadership.
Yeah. Flat. Yeah.
That's the word. Were those things that were, when you first started out, were those things that were sought after?
Yeah, the company just in the last year has changed pretty tremendously, but all of this stuff was there. I maybe helping to frame it a little bit and have some kind of structure around it so we can talk about it and be really proud about it. Yeah. But it all existed. And what I think the challenge is that as you continue to grow, that you hold on to the essence of what has made the company super successful, while at the same time, ensuring that you've got all the building blocks in place to continue to thrive and grow in the future.
When you first started in HR, period, like with Care West, and you were working in Switzerland, and were those things that people were talking about? Was authenticity, was that on the docket?
No.
Was transparency? It wasn't, eh?
No, but I think just like our first kind of foray into this discussion was around purpose. I think companies, generally had an underlying purpose, and whether they talked about it in those terms or not, I think the same thing is true for some of the words that we're using here around transparency and authenticity. I think sometimes it just existed and people didn't call it out. But I do believe that organizations have changed, and some of the most successful organizations in the world have different cultures. So I think the culture really has to tie to the business strategy and how you are setting out to differentiate yourself from the marketplace.
Do cultures change? Like I'm sure you've seen some cultural change. I mean, the bigger question is, how do cultures develop? And that might be biting off like more than I can chew right now. But I'm sure you have some sense of this. How does a culture develop? And then, like, is that okay for the culture to kind of change and shift as you go along? And how do you manage that? Because again, we're trying to focus on one thing, one particular culture. This is who we are. This is what's built our success in the past. So how do you maintain culture when growth is exponential?
Yeah. It's a gnarly problem to have, because I think, we send signals every day, particularly in leadership roles. Leaders cast big shadows, and it's the things that you say, the time you spend, the money you spend, the questions you ask, the things you don't say. And all of that sends signals to the organization about what's important, maybe what isn't important, and you do it unconsciously most of the time. So, I think that cultures are best described as the way a place feels when you're there. And so it's hard to put all of your fingertips on it, but I think they do evolve over time. I think that they can become stronger, frankly, over time. They can also become weaker over time. And I think the connection, again, back to that kind of business strategy, ambition, what it's like to work at a place, and having kind of the infrastructure around it to support that culture is really important. Because if you say that you want employees to have an entrepreneurial spirit, you want employees to have some ownership and accountability, but yet they have no decision-making rights in their job, then those two things don't align, right? And so people can see that very, very clearly, and so you have to be able to, ensure that over time, as things evolve, that your culture is aligning to what you're trying to achieve, and that everything else in the organization, some of the policies and processes and way work gets done, and work environment, all of that contributes to that culture that you're trying to build and keep.
And how do you do that? Like Parkland has companies in the Caribbean.
Yes.
And their headquarters is here in Calgary, Alberta. And you're all over the world, actually. Like, how do you do that? Like, that's a large part of your role, is to maintain that culture across geography. How does one person do that? I mean, you have a team, but how do you set the strategy to do that? That's an impressive and large feat that is just beyond what I can imagine doing. So how do you go about that? Like, what's the methodology there?
Gosh, really, I think what we try to do is consider our culture when we make important decisions. And even some not important decisions, right? Because as I said, the decisions that you make really show what's important to an organization. And so there are times that decisions bubble up to the senior leadership team or to our CEO. And we, as an organization and as a team, have to decide whether we should really be weighing into that decision, or whether we should push the decision back down to the organization, to the people that have raised it, to a team, so that those kinds of decisions don't always have to come all the way up to the top. And just that, in and of itself, shows the organization that not all of the decisions have to be made by the CEO or the senior leaders. Now, we don't do this perfectly either, but it's one of the things that we try to be really conscious of. And even when we're making some very small decisions, like, as an example, I'll give you a specific Canadian example and a specific Calgary example. as we're leading into the stampede period here in Calgary, one of the questions that kind of came through our business units, through to essentially our total rewards team and up to me, was how we were going to manage like the stampede parade day. Right? And we're now in a downtown office environment, or at least some of us were at that time. And many of our competitive peer set in the downtown office, they have, half a day off for the parade or, some sort of policy related to that. And so what were we going to do? And this ultimately came to me. And it was a really interesting experience because in the end, sure, I could have made a call, but should the head of HR in a company like Parkland be deciding the time off of an employee in a particular city in a particular country when we operate across 25 of them now? And so it's things like that I think send a signal again that this kind of decision isn't up to me, it's actually up to you. In the business, you're running the business every day. Does it make sense that your people come in on that day, or they work from home, or they have some other alternative? That's not something that has to be decided centrally, and I think that sends a signal.
If you did, like you thought about this, and there was a process here, if you did communicate something, yes, you get X amount of time, says Stephanie McDonald.
Yeah.
And you sent a communique out. What would that have communicated?
Well,
what was the flip side of that?
Yeah, I think the flip side is that all time off decisions have to be made by Stephanie McDonald. And I definitely don't want that to happen because I'm not the expert in what kind of time off needs to happen in Barbados. Or Salt Lake City, or even Montreal, because every office environment, we run a very diverse business. It's a very distributed workforce, and one size can't fit all. I mean, the underlying principle and philosophy should be standard, but how it's actually implemented in the markets, I think is a real local decision, because we have local customers, and it's those local customers that we serve.
And that would have propagated the top-down thing.
Yeah, I think so. And, hopefully my team would never allow me to do something as crazy as that.
You were asked to do that, though? Like somebody came to you with something and said, hey, what do we do here?
Yeah. And I said, I don't know. What do we do here? And let's talk about it a little bit. Yeah. Because sometimes, you can make a really gut reaction, instinct and decision, and sometimes those are best. And then other times, when you involve more people in the decision-making process, you make much better decisions. And in those kinds of questions, we had a really good kind of discussion and debate. And I think in the end, it was the right one for Parkland.
That's great.
Yeah.
You mentioned something about culture, and what you said was we consider culture in our decisions.
Yeah.
Was that a thing 10 years ago? Was that a thing 20? I imagine it wasn't a thing 20 years ago. I don't know if you would have, I don't know if that was a thing. Is it a thing?
Yeah.
Was it a thing?
I don't know. I think it is a thing at Parkland because we consider culture a competitive advantage.
Yeah. Okay. Dive into that if you can.
Yeah.
Because that is, this is a hard asset business.
Yeah.
That works in fuel, and considered probably by a lot of people a traditional business in some ways, not the way it's run, but like what you do.
We celebrated our 50-year anniversary, so it's not like we just started, last week.
Pups. Yeah. The company started as, from what I understand, it started in agriculture.
Yeah.
And then it grew
Cattle.
to like acquiring, cattle, and then it grew to like acquiring more fuel kind of distributors, and then now it's like a conglomerator of a fuel distribution, which is a very traditional business, and yet you were saying, let's consider culture in our decision making. So dive into that for me and tell me, because that's kind of an exciting thing. Like how does that come about?
Yeah. I think it comes about because of, again, that balance that we try to strike between what made Parkland super successful in the past and where we want to take this company in the future. And so, the way we get things done and the kind of environment that we try to create and maintain and champion is all really tied to what we're trying to do as an organization. And so that alignment, I think, is really important at Parkland in particular because of the speed and pace at which we grow, of the required kind of nimbleness and creativity that our strategy demands. It's not a place for everybody. It's one of the really interesting things about being in HR and thinking about culture so deeply is that Parkland is a great company to work for and with and at, but not for everybody because, we are not super structured. And so somebody who doesn't thrive in an environment with some ambiguity that needs a rule book or at least, a step-by-step guide for what they need to do and how to do and those kinds of things, they typically struggle in a Parkland environment because we just simply don't have it. And we need to build some of it for sure because it will allow us to continue to actually speed up and grow. But we don't want to introduce too much of that because it also decreases the opportunity for us to react to what's going on in the marketplace and with our customers and frankly with our employees.
Is that stressful for people? Some people like structure, some people like ambiguity and entrepreneurship. You're dealing with thousands of people. Tell me about the stressors and where are some of the cracks there?
Yeah. In this company, the speed is intense. I always tell people that you have to find another gear. Or lace up your running shoes because Parkland's a very, very fast-paced environment. And so that's definitely a stressor and doesn't fit with everybody. But other people thrive with that type of speed and pace. And so I think, when you're considering joining a company like Parkland, or if you've joined and you're trying to decide whether you stay at a company like Parkland, you really have to know a little bit about yourself and how you like to work and what environment suits you the best. And we do the same, of course, on our side. It's always a two-way street when you're deciding to join a company. But I think that there are those kinds of stressors in a company like Parkland. So certainly around pace and speed, there isn't a lot of structure, as we've talked about. We do try to really promote that entrepreneurial spirit and that local decision-making because that's where our customers are. Sometimes the level of transparency can be a deciding factor for people. The amount of accountability.
Positive or negative?
Either way,
yeah,
right?
They're like, I don't want to know all this.
Yes,
just give me my
I want to.
work.
Yeah, I want to come in
Sure.
and I want to go, and I don't want to feel like I have to be so deeply connected to the company or to the ambition.
I love how that's communicated, right? This isn't for everyone, and if you're willing to lace up your shoes, let's go for it. For those who have been in the company, for a long time now, do you see more issues around wellness in a company that moves quickly? I imagine for some that contributes to wellness because a lot of people like to get it done. And that gives them meaning and purpose and all these things that contribute to wellness. For some, I imagine it's incredibly stressful. Is there, what's the balance there? And do you see mental wellness as a thing that's important in an organization that moves at 1 million miles an hour?
Yes.
I guess, how are you going to say no? No, mental wellness is
terrible.
Not important.
Yeah,
we don't believe in that crap.
No, but I think it does. I mean, the initial thing is all about fit in the end. And so having some awareness of yourself and what it takes for you to thrive, I think is really important. And so from an HR standpoint, I think it's important for people to get a sense of those things if they don't already know them, for each individual. When you go back to that 2016 Parkland and where we are today, we have employees that have been with the company for a long time, and they're still with us. And then we have other employees who may have been with us in 2016 and really liked that company and that size of company and where we were in our evolution then, but frankly just don't feel like they want to be part of the future for whatever reason it is. And so that's okay, because we have the full spectrum. We have some people that have been with the company for a long time, and we have a tremendous amount of new people because of the continual growth that the company has gone through. But it's all down to making sure that you're in the right place for you and you're in the right job for you, and that it's the right environment for you to really thrive.
The fit is really important for mental wellness proper, is what I'm hearing. And
that's what I think.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant. And the communication of that is probably not always easy. Like to communicate, this is not the best environment for everyone. It's a really good environment for some. And you're either in or you're out. I know that's crass. How do you communicate that? Like, how do you communicate that to your colleagues and then writ large to the organization to say that this is not the perfect environment for everyone, but for those who want to work here, should work here? How do you?
Yep.
I'm stumbling over it because it's a tough communicate. Like, how do you do that?
Yeah. Well, again, I think it goes back to kind of this transparency and authenticity that we've been talking about. But I also think that, it happens in stages too, because we certainly, every interview that I've had since joining Parkland, I'm a transparent person anyway, but I'm really transparent about what it's like to work at Parkland because it's important.
What do you say?
I say that it is a fast-paced environment, like we've talked about. It's a very transparent, open, low ego, kind of humble, courageous environment. And people work really, really hard at Parkland. They work really, really hard. And it just isn't the right fit for everybody. And that's okay. But I think one of the things that's important at the very outset is that people know. And that you're honest about it. In fact, we hired a head of our health and safety and environment team recently, and I remember sitting across from him at our interview time. We had an interview over breakfast, and I remember telling him that this is a crazy company. We move fast, et cetera, and he joined us a number of months later, and within 90 days of him starting, he and I were having another kind of catch-up conversation, and he related back to me that I was absolutely true when I told him about Parkland during that interview process, and that he was thankful that he knew in advance what he was getting into.
Did he stay?
Yeah.
Nice.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's this really interesting notion that I've been thinking a lot about, and I can't quite articulate it, and I'm hoping you can help me. I think there's a notion, something in the ether, that if you work really hard, that's bad for your mental health. And I think it is largely because rates of burnout are increasing, and it's being recognized, like it's a diagnosis now in some psychological psychiatric manuals. But the underlying premise, and it might be the millennials, it might be my people to blame for this, so I apologize, that the harder you work, the more likely you are to have mental health issues or struggle with your mental wellness. And I can't articulate it beyond that because it's just like a sense of things. Like mental wellness is achieved in the yoga studio or on a beach or on a bicycle only. Those are the places that you can achieve mental wellness. What you're saying is fit is a really important thing, and you can have mental wellness in a space that is exponentially changing and really hardworking.
Yeah.
That's all I got.
Well, and also
I want
to
you to, like, help me out with that.
Well, so far so good, I would say. The thing that I think is important is also that awareness of yourself. And I think that helps, because if you do know yourself, then you can make decisions about what is best for you and how you react to things. And so I think that's what I would also add to your equation there, is that some good self-awareness often helps when it comes to mental health and whether people are feeling healthy at work. Because I mean, people, we're all humans. We come to work with our whole selves, whether we like it or not. We have families, we have friends, we have finance issues. We've got all sorts of things, right? And everybody does. And we spend a tremendous amount of time at work. And so when you have a good sense of self, you kind of are grounded in who you are as an individual and what makes you tick, and how you like to get things done and what environment works best for you. Then I think that you make decisions every day that help you essentially maintain the right health for you. And it's not always easy, because everybody goes through peaks and valleys and troughs and mountains. But as long as you can continue to know who you are, I think that also really helps come up with solutions about what you're going to do more of, less of, and that kind of thing.
Do you see part of your role as either helping people or identifying if they're fit or not? Like, is that something that you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think having really open conversations with people about what they're really after, and that kind of thing is part of the work.
Yeah.
And is a really interesting part of the work, because everybody is an individual. You said earlier about this notion of millennials and apologizing on behalf of this cohort. But I kind of resist the notion of generalizations, even generational.
Awesome.
Because I really believe that every person is a unique kind of snowflake, as it were. And what you like may not really resonate for your peer group, the millennials, either. And so that approach, I think, also helps, because everybody, again, one size doesn't necessarily fit all. And so I do believe that part of the gig is to have a good sense of people and be able to have real conversations with people about what it is they're after and whether it aligns. And if it doesn't, then again, it's kind of okay.
I love that in particular, because there is this broad millennial brush, and the millennials that were part of my cohort, especially those so when I left to go to university, spent all of my time with 18, 19, 20-year-olds who were trying to get into medical school. Very type A, extremely driven, literally worked like studying 16 to 18 hours every single day, day in, day out. So when I heard of like millennials don't work hard and they're brittle, I was like, what is that? Like, I just had never really seen that. And I haven't seen, outside of a couple, I guess, cursory statistics or pieces, that there's a lot of evidence to support that. It's very much like, they're not as tough as they used to be, sort of thing. So anyway, that is to say, I really love your perspective on fit and how that ties into mental wellness, and in your leadership in that space. I want to ask you personally about, what do you do to stay mentally well, mentally fit? Any tricks or tips or daily habits that you implement? You have a big job, and it's changing. because your workforce is ever expanding. So what do you do to stay grounded and stay healthy?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of the same lens that I apply to our employees too, right? Because in the end, if you relate an employee to a high performance athlete, you know, you need to have the right amount of nutrition, the right amount of sleep, you know, the right stressors, the clarity of the outcomes and ambitions and objectives that you're trying to reach, and the right physical and mental health. And so if you can think about how to put all those elements together and create an environment that is supportive of those things, then I think you have a high performance culture, and you can see it directly in the business results and in the bottom line. And so if I relay that to me, you know, I would say that I'm probably my toughest critic. I, you know, have high standards, and sometimes that causes a lot of personal anxiety and frustration and challenge with me. And so one of the things that I try to do is to be a bit kinder to myself, you know, to let things go a little bit more. When I came to Parkland, one of the things that I had to get used to was this, things don't have to be perfect to start. We expect that things will continue to improve over time, but you know, not everything has to be a perfect product before you actually try it out in a company like Parkland. And that was different than my last company, or the way I perceived my last company. And so, you know, I've learned, or I'm trying to learn, how to be a bit kinder and how to let things go. And of course, you know, look after myself physically. Over this last year, it has been a crazy year at Parkland. And I haven't been looking after myself physically and mentally like I want to and like I should. And so I've also been trying to, you know, do the things that you said before. Go to a Pilates class. Go back and do things that I really like to do. You know, I really like to cook too, as an example. It's one of the things that, you know, allows me to kind of decompress, let's say. And over the last year, frankly, I haven't been doing much of that. I've been working a lot, and it's been great. But I also know that in order to continue to bring my best to work, then I also have to be a bit more balanced for me. And that's my own kind of unique chemistry and what I need to do in order to be successful at work. And I want everybody to achieve that over time. The last thing I'd say is, it's kind of funny, and it seems super simple, is that I'm trying to learn how to breathe. Which, you know, I breathe all the time, but
You
really,
shallow breather?
yeah, exactly. Really kind of leverage, because there's a lot of power in that, right?
That's important,
And
yeah.
so when I need to feel, you know, calm, when I need to feel grounded, when I need to, you know, really focus, I'm finding that if I can spend just a few minutes focusing on my breathing and doing something that simple, that can often really help me. So again, I'm kind of a work in progress, but I'm trying.
That's great. Stephanie, you are an advocate for everything we stand for in terms of wellness and culture and bold leadership in this space. So thank you for your wisdom and sharing everything with us today. And it's been really exciting having you on. Thank you for joining us today.
No, it's been super fun. And thanks for all the work that you guys do too, because it's really important, and it's really kind of bringing up the awareness and frankly the tools for managers to help them realize that they can have a really important kind of impact in this space for their employees and for their workplaces.
Very cool. Thank you.